All right. We are back with SIC Talks. This is number 114. I'm here with Delia Cai, who is a writer and an editor. She is the mind behind Deez Links, the celebrated newsletter, and creator of, among other things, the Hate Reads franchise, and just generally like a pro at this Substack business, I would say, Delia. So
Well,
welcome.
that's very kind. Thank you for having me, Ben. It's nice to be just out in the world, even if the world is online right now. So
Well, I mean, this of course is one of the things we'll talk about. But you're at home in Brooklyn, is that right? Are you
mhm.
in Brooklyn? Good,
Yes, I'm in Bed-Stuy.
gotcha. And I'm up in Greenpoint. So hello to everybody who's tuning in live and watching us from around the world, wherever you are. Feel free to, if you are watching us live on Substack, please drop a line in the comments or say hello or wave or whatever. And we will shout you out. In the meantime, though, Delia, so I became aware of you in advance of, I don't know whether it was through Deez Links or not. Did you start like your journey to public intellectual as a newsletter writer? I mean, I know you've worked in magazines and publishing for a long time, but is that I don't know. Did you sort of become known as a newsletterer?
Yeah, I think so because I started the newsletter at my first like internship out of college where I was at Atlantic Media as part of their fellowship program.
Oh, cool.
And I was basically just sitting in a cubicle all day, kind of bored out of my mind. And I was supposed to like be working on this thing called like strategy research, which like I don't know, when you're 22, you don't really know what that means. I still kind of barely know what that means, but it was a lot of like
Yeah,
reading about the media industry and kind of writing a lot of memos and even this internal newsletter for the company that was just sort of like kind of just supposed to keep everyone briefed on like what the big trends in the industry coming down the pipe were. And so this was kind of like, I would say, sort of like the first wave, at least the first wave that I noticed of like newsletters being really interesting. I was reading like Anne Friedman's newsletter, I was reading Today in Tabs. Newsletters like those were sort of my kind of post grad education into media because I'd gone to journalism school and we'd learned things like how to write, a lead, but not necessarily like, what is everyone in the industry doing right now. So that just felt like a very native way to experiment because I think I had come of age when everyone was blogging.
right.
And, even in journalism school, they told us, like, you should have a website, you should be blogging. And so to me, I remember sitting in the cubicle thinking, like, a newsletter, like a tiny letter feels just like the next extension of that. So I'll start blogging as well. And it kind of just snowballed from there. I think I started just wanting to have an outlet to kind of tinker around and figure out, like, how I felt about media and what was
Sure.
interesting in media. And it just kind of like, I don't know, really ran away from there. Um, and I think
Did,
that's what's really like led me to all the like to where I am now, career wise, for sure.
Got it. Did Deez Links? I mean, and I say this as someone with the handle Dietz nuts on almost every platform. The Deez Links is sort of a funny. It's a little bit jokey, and it
hmm
is sort of interesting for me to hear that came out of like an immediate graduation from J school, because I would imagine at that point you're also sort of thinking about how can I be taken seriously? How should I be branded in the world? Right? Like my handle comes
hmm
from literally an AOL Instant Messenger thing in 1999, so I've been writing it for a really long time. But did you have a sense that like the sort of tongue in cheek humorness of the title was gonna propel it, or was that not something? Was it not a consideration
No,
at the time?
no. I mean, it's funny now because I mean, come February, it will have been 10 years since I started Deez Links. And like, if you had told me in 2016, are you prepared to say the name of
Right.
this newsletter out loud in very serious context for like the next decade? I'd been like, oh no, let me think about this a little
Yeah,
more
right. Yeah,
hard.
exactly.
No, it was more just like, I thought I was just gonna like, to me, it's like the equivalent of starting just like a funny, like shit post Twitter account for
Right.
my friends, which I had done in college, and so I just thought it was just gonna be another like funny little project like that no one would know about. And yeah, so I
10
feel
years
like
later.
the lesson from that is like think a little harder about the names that you pick for your projects because they kind of stick with you.
Well, but I mean, by the same token, it is, and of course, I feel similarly. I used to get approached about changing my social handles occasionally. Corporate minders or whatever would be like, "Yeah, you really ought to change that. It shouldn't be Dietz Nuts anymore." But it's enough of for me anyway. It's enough of a generational joke that people are like, "Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Great, we'll participate." So I would imagine it must have propelled you in some way. It's interesting, right? It's like we live in that push pull of needing to cut through and also needing to be taken seriously.
Yes.
And I don't think anybody's really truly resolved it.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, I think like a cardinal mistake sometimes of being on the internet and, trying to be successful in whatever ways is taking it too seriously because I
Yeah.
think at the end it does all feel very absurd. And I think acknowledging that in some ways can be helpful.
Do you? I like the idea. I mean, of first of all, I have to say this. I like the idea of this J school instructing you that you ought to be working in public as part of the curriculum, right? Because I think
Mhm.
in one of the things that I complain a lot about is the orthodoxies and the sort of rules that former colleagues used to bring to um, media companies and that inhibited my work as a commercial person, right? Like
Mhm.
inveterately. So I like the idea that you were leaving school at the idea that with the idea that you were in a hybrid moment where things had to morph and be different. Um, I had a conversation with Cami Fateh from Feed Me the other day, and
Mhm.
she was talking about how now it's a total requisite and essentially like everybody blogs and then you learn how to apply your journalism school techniques to it afterwards. Was that happening when you were there, or is it or have you needed to work that all out in public over the last decade?
Um, I'm like trying to remember.
Yeah.
I think
So
yeah.
sorry. Let me excuse my interruption, but Malik in the comments just asked, like, does J School tell you
Oh,
to become a brand, which is a different way of asking the same question.
yeah. No, I think that's a really good question. I'm really trying to remember because it was kind of like I think it was a strange tension even then because the way that the journalism school at Mizzou is set up is that like you go to J school and then or you're part of the J school and everyone has the same first 2 years. This is like really getting in the weeds, but I think it might be helpful. But everyone has the first 2 years of just general kind of like journalistic training. You go to the same classes, you learn how to like I don't know, like shoot video and edit audio and all that kind of thing. And then you start to specialize junior and senior year. And so you can either go into stratcom, like strategic communications,
Sure.
you can go into news, like news, you can go into broadcast news, you can go to magazine. So it was like the whole like philosophy. It's really funny because I really think now about how they set the school up and kind of how genius it was because the whole idea was that like you're all going to need to know the same basic things. And the idea that actually the worlds of advertising and journalism were kind of maybe more permeable than maybe even they wanted us to, they could acknowledge in school. And so I think like it was really funny because on one hand, I did Stratcom. And so, the first years it was like this very ivory tower kind of, this is what capital J journalism is. And then the last 2 years I spent just learning about like branding and marketing.
Sure.
And so it was kind of impossible to not get that all mixed up in my head. I think, I'm sure there were factions of the school that were sort of like, don't think of journalism as a brand, but it was sort of impossible not to, especially I think once they were really at least pushing like, you should think about your niche, you should think about how you present online. Like they were, to Mizzou's credit, I think they were very ahead of the game, or at
Yeah,
least
it
like on the
sounds that
ball
way.
about that. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's been almost 30 years since I was in college, never mind having never gone to J school. So it's part of my fascination in the whole thing, but it sounds like they were ahead of it because that certainly wasn't, those were not conversations I was having with young people in 2016.
Mm.
Um, well, okay. So here we are a decade later and you also, and this is what, so we met for those who are doing the anthropology here, we met in person the first time at an event that our mutual friend Bryn Wallner did, and then we met again, former guest of the show, and then we met again at an event that Casey Lewis did, former guest of the show too. And in both of those, we talked about how you were embodying, I think, a lot of the modern media condition right now, right? On the one hand, you do the newsletter. On the other hand, you are the managing editor of another newsletter. On the other hand, you are a contributing editor to a more legacy publication. Feel free to talk or not talk about any of those as you see fit. But like your hybrid existence, I think in a lot of respects is emblematic of the current media condition, but also I think is kind of aspirational in a interesting way, because it gives you a lot of ability to determine your own destiny and path. Does it feel that way to you, or is that just me looking in from the outside?
I think it feels that way on like good days,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
it's like actually it's really nice to hear that, because I think some days I'm like, oh my God, like I don't really know what I'm doing. And this isn't really what I pictured, where I would be, I think 10 years into a career. It feels, I think I really subscribe to this belief of like, if you just work really hard, you end up being on staff somewhere forever.
Right.
And that, I think it's very clear that's not the case for anyone anymore. And even I think these really wonderful institutions we look up to, I talk to my friends who work there, and it's very grueling at best, and very sort of, it's not terribly stable there either. And so I think
Sure.
being able to have a few, to sort of like have a few pots on the stove that all seem to be doing interesting things and growing in interesting ways is like I remember, I think when I was first talking to Laura Riley about helping her out with Magazine, her shopping newsletter, which is just like, I was just always such a fan for a while.
Same. Yeah.
And yeah, and so when she was looking for a managing editor, we were chatting, and I was just kind of like, I just feel like this isn't me trying to work for a newsletter. It's like this is the new Vogue in town. And so, the appeal to me of like this business is like, this is where things are happening. This is where things are growing. I'm kind of format agnostic, but also like, obviously I love the newsletter format, and, feel like I know it pretty intimately. But yeah, it wasn't so much of like, who else is doing newsletter stuff that I can help with. It was more just like, so what places are growing? Because I do think, as much as we talk about like media dying and institutions dying, I think the other half of that coin is like, but there are always new places growing and popping up. And I think part of the skill is just trying to figure out where that is,
Yeah.
and who those people are. And Laura and Magazine, I think, are one of those places that's like, oh yeah, like amazing potential growing so
I think
fast.
so. I think so too. I'm a huge fan of Laura's and of Magazine. For those who are not familiar, that's Magazine spelled in the French way, but pronounced Magazine in the English way. So in other words, Magasin. Excellent, excellent newsletter, both from a reference standpoint for where, as Delia says, the industry is shifting and manifesting, but also just like Laura's taste is excellent, the stuff she recommends is excellent, and the people she collaborates with, yourself, Louis, Cheslaw, among them, also excellent. So there you go. Good job, Laura. Um, the the It's funny you should say you're platform agnostic, because one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was um bringing hate reads to life through this event, which was, I think, maybe the first time that Substack, or maybe not the first time, but it was early in Substack bringing writers into the real world IRL. And I remember that event where the first hate read series was read aloud by its contributors, and they revealed themselves as being both very buzzy and widely covered, deep sense of FOMO for not having been there, but also it was emblematic, I think, of an attitude of like, yeah, fuck it, let's see what happens, let's throw
Mhm.
ourselves into it. Was that an idea that you came up with? Did they come to you? Did you have to be coaxed? Did they have to be coaxed? Like, how did that come to life?
I'm so glad that you're giving Hate Read that credit, because it was like I had like launched Hate Read season 1 it was like spring 2024. And I remember thinking like I would love to do some kind of reading or event like this. New York has kind of been lousy with, really like amazing readings and events like that, I think sort of since the pandemic. And I was sort of
Yep.
like, I've always wanted to do something to be a part of that, but I just didn't really have any event experience. And
Sure.
sort of like this very, serendipitous thing happened where Matt Starr, who I think was quite new to Substack at that point, he's
Yep.
sort of like one of their events extraordinaires. He did the reading at the baths. He's like such a genius.
Shout out Matt.
He,
Yeah, who does Green Baby Press, which is another great thing for people to
yes,
follow if you don't already. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, Matt's had this reputation, like, before his time at Substack for just putting on these really awesome literary indie events, and so he reached out and was just like, "Hey, like, do you wanna do something?" Just kind of banking on this momentum because the first season really took off in a way
Yeah.
that, was very surprising, and so he put that event together in, like, 12 days, and so it ended up being the first event he produced, for Substack, and, I was kind of so like excited to just have that happen, but I am also sort of very gratified that we were able to sort of like put our stake in the like newsletter to event, I guess like pipeline early on because it
Yeah,
was really fun. Yeah.
it's going to be, I mean, it will, like within whatever small community or large community this sort of gestalt ends up mattering to, it will be a seminal moment. So it's cool that you got to do that. And it's also,
Mhm.
the idea of paying off the hate read, by each of the authors with the actual performances was cool. Was it difficult to coax them
No,
into it,
because
your
I think
contributors?
no, because I think like once it started just catching on, it became I think it just became very exciting to be like I'm part of this, and people wanted to say that they were part of it. I think even like the most controversial post that was part of that, like the menswear one.
Sure.
We were like, oh, we should really do a big reveal of it. But then it turned out that that writer was out of town. But I think he revealed it later. Um, DM me if you want to know who it is. But I think it's kind of nice. It's a little bit of a secret still.
Interesting. I was going to say his name, but I won't now because it's a little bit of a secret. Okay, fine. Well, so this conversation, which accompanies my newsletter SIC every Wednesday, is ostensibly about, but it's both, my guests' way of looking at the world, but also like I'm really interested to know what interesting people look for their sources of information and perspective and reference and or hate reads, whatever the case may
Mhm,
be. And so I sent you over a whip list from the newsletter this week, and you picked out some links, and one of them is a public performance piece, shall we
mhm,
say, by our soon-to-be mayor Zohran Mamdani over the
mhm.
weekend at the Museum of Moving Image in Queens, where he sat Marina Abramovich style with New Yorkers and listened to their concerns. What was it about that piece that grabbed you from the wide list of stuff that I sent over?
I mean, I think that like that performance itself is like that piece is really great, worth reading because the kicker especially was basically just like, Zoran's whole thing is that he was like, we campaign in poetry, but we are going to govern in prose. It's like a line that he cribbed from Mario Cuomo and like quoted at Andrew Cuomo the night he won, which was like so so baller.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I think everyone is very interested in like, okay, you could run a great campaign. Does that really translate into being a great mayor? And I think that piece was very much sort of like, I think like kind of digging into that idea of like, like I think it was sort of even looking at like, let's just evaluate this performance then for what it is. And how it works and what the effect is like. And, the last line is sort of just like the whole like poetry and prose thing, it's sort of irrelevant. Like, this is a performance. It's maybe always a performance. And I think that was just a really interesting idea. I just feel like, yeah, Zoran doing performance art before he gears up to be a mayor after like, running just like the most impressive campaign is just like kind of the cherry on top of the sundae. Like, I think it really like is like emblematic of our time
Mhm.
of just the way that like everything is flattened into this kind of like how well can you command attention and how well can you maintain this relationship with the public, which I
Sure.
think is, very much a political thing, but it's also very much like anyone who's trying to create a following, that's top of mind. And so I think, yeah, it's sort of like a really interesting, I guess, like document of our moment, the way that he
Yeah.
chose to do that. And I'm so impressed. I was like, that's a good idea. There are very
It's a
few, I
it's
think, like political things that I'm like, that's pretty good.
it's a really good idea. I don't did you try to register by any chance?
No, no, I, like, missed it completely, but I was sort of like, wow, like, I think the article is interesting because it was talking about how they really tried to not get the super fans, like, I think they went through some, like, unions, because they really just wanted, like, normal people to come and not, like, like, the hot girls for Zoran. Um, so that was interesting too,
I
like,
mean,
how they try to screen that,
if Emrata wants to come, we'll let her come in, but,
Yeah, yeah.
otherwise I tried to register and about 30 minutes after receiving the email on it, and to be very clear, like I am not a hot girl for Zoran at all. I didn't campaign. I'm a registered independent. I didn't campaign. I didn't vote for him in the primary. I didn't vote for him in the general because I'm registered upstate. And so anyway, but little disclosure there, political disclosure.
Mm,
But I did think participating in that moment would be really interesting, and so I tried. And half an hour after getting the newsletter, the email, like shut down, all
mhm,
fully packed out. But I think it is interesting. You're right about the idea of performance as the new standard of well, it's interesting. It's performance as the new standard of performance, meaning like you can't be
mhm.
effective if you don't know how to
Yes.
put yourself out in that fashion. And if you don't know how to think about novel ways to bring yourself into a market or into a dialogue, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful in that way. Um, are you surrounded by people who are stoked on Zoran coming? Is there anybody who is worried for any reason about him? Because I am surrounded by people, maybe not surrounded, but I am certainly know a populace of people who are concerned, and
Mhm.
I don't share that concern at all, but I wonder sort of where else it's manifesting.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the people that I'm around are sort of like, it's really fun to root him on, but like when the minute he's our actual mayor, I think people are going to, become very cynical and jaded about like how it all actually works.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of like, that's fine. Honestly, like I think for me, the selection was like less so like, is this one man going to fix everything? Like, no. But I did appreciate as like we had an election. It was a citywide vibe check of like, are people happy with this? Are people supporting?
Right.
Do people want things to continue, or are we all in alignment that like it's too expensive and we need to change things, and perhaps we should help people who need help? So I think to me, like I find it just like that the election very gratifying to be like, okay, so we all feel this, and
Yeah.
we all like took a choice to try to make it better, and like maybe this guy will do it and surpass all our expectations. But it just feels a bit, I think, a bit more of like a relief in terms of like, okay, so we all feel this and we're gonna try this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think further to that, like actions like this, performative as though they may be, are indicative of, at the very least, a real commitment to dialogue and discussion, and not a commitment to dogma or the party politics of the past or whatever it is. I always say to people, like, the guy was a rapper. He's going to the way he will approach this job is going to be very different than
Mhm,
politics in the
mhm.
past. Anyway, um, well, uh, in my like lame attempt to link together topics, Zoran would have graduated from college and started his career around the same time you did, maybe a little earlier, which was 2015, 16. And
Yeah.
another one of the pieces that you highlighted was Ryan Broderick's piece about how 2025 was the year everyone talked about 2015. There was another piece that the Social Juice did about 2016 being the year. So I want to hear why you
Mm.
picked the 15 one, and also like what got you about that? And then I wonder about the 2015-16 thing.
I feel like, I mean, I think to me, when you talk about 2016, to me, you just like can't really escape the election.
Sure.
Whereas 2015 sort of just feels more like you can at least focus on like a bit more of like the culture. Um, 15 is when I graduated from college. So that's probably why it's also
Another one, right? Sure.
meaningful to me. But yeah, I mean, I think another one, another link we were sort of talking about was just this like the transition from millennial cringe to millennial optimism in terms of
Hmm.
just this general nostalgia, both that like Gen Zers have for the trappings of millennial life, that seems just simpler and less mediated and, slightly less online. And then I think that's really coinciding with, I feel like there's this also sentiment also just for people who long for this internet of before. It's not just like life before the internet, it's more like the internet before it was this internet.
Right.
And Ryan's piece really, I think, traces like the specific ways that even like the founders of that internet, that 2015 internet themselves, are trying to go back a bit. Whether it's, I think Jack Dorsey trying to, um, is he still like he's still involved with Blue Sky, or like there's some company that's trying to just like take Twitter back. Basically, like they
Well,
want the
he
copyright, they want the logo.
well, and
That's not Jack, is
no,
it?
but he is involved. I was involved in the start of Blue Sky and is involved in Revine or Divine or whatever it is, the
Yes,
new
that's it. Yeah.
the recapitulation of the Vine idea, the 6-second
Yes.
video idea.
Yeah, so, like, he's trying to kind of basically bring Vine back. Elon is trying to bring Vine back and has sort of, alluded to, like, we have all these archives, we're gonna do something with it. It's like, please don't, honestly. Um, and, like, even just generally, I think, like, a few days ago, I was seeing some stuff online about people really, lamenting, like, there used to be good websites. We even used to have a website called Stumble Upon, and you would just spend, like, a good amount of time on it just looking at other delightful little websites that kind
Right.
of just exist for no extractive reason. It was just to purely be delightful. And
Extractive reason is
yes.
a really excellent sort of thing to put a pin in. But anyway, please continue, and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, I like it's sort of weird, like, I've never, like, articulated that, but it is, I think, what we feel about this internet now versus the internet of this, like, kind of somewhat arbitrary 10 years ago, but I think just, like, the internet before Trump took over, is definitely a very internet than, what we have now, and so I think there's just this general nostalgia that's, like, before Trump, before, you know, TikTok, and before being, harassed at every corner of the internet to sign up for a membership and to have, just more and more asked of you versus like this idea that like there once was a time when you lived in Williamsburg and you could have a cheap beer and then go and look at websites and it was all like no one was just trying to rob you at every corner, I think, which is what life kind of feels like now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the amazing and ironic thing about that is that on the one hand, having been in Williamsburg at that time, like
Mhm.
nobody was calling you to action, trying to evoke a response with every gesture online, but
Yeah.
actually somebody might actually rob you on the corner in
Yeah.
Williamsburg, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we forget, but Williams it wasn't a particularly safe place at that time, and so
Yeah.
it's interesting how we've been subsumed by this bubble of uh, you know safety and distance in one way, and been removed from um, serendipity in others. The thing that's so funny for me as an registered old person qualifying for AARP membership, literally, is that the the seminal moment in my return to New York in 2002 from a year abroad in Australia was listening to LCD Sound System's "Losing My Edge," which is a song about the millennial optimism of Gen X people who missed the boat in the
Mhm.
1980s or 1990s or whatever it is. It's like this complaint has reoccurred every decade or however often. But it's really interesting, the little points that get brought up, right? Like it's the Lumineers song instead of the first can practices in Cologne. Um it's the girls reference instead of Daft Punk being played to the rock kids at CBGB's. It's
Mhm.
so every generation. Sorry, now I'm quoting Paul Simon. Every generation throws a hero off the pop charts, and it's like every generation launches its complaint about
Mhm.
about missing the previous moment. Do you
Mhm.
feel, what are you reminiscent? What are you like nostalgic about for those days? Is there a $4 beer in Williamsburg that you really miss? Doesn't have to be Williamsburg, obviously.
Yeah. Um, it's funny because like I do feel like, I came to New York in 2016 and, you know, I don't think that like I found really what like New York was about to me for like a few years. And so
Sure,
I'm sort of like, I don't really have any nostalgia for being in my early 20s. But I guess I do, I think when I hear stories from people who've been in New York longer or who are just older than me, I do feel nostalgic for this idea of like they were able to assemble their social groups and their networks sort of without social media to sort of I've never existed, I think, socially without social media. Like I
sure.
was on
Yeah, yeah.
MySpace in 6th grade. So that
Wow.
was always, I think, just part of it. Whereas I think the idea of like, like someone I know who's been in New York for 16 years and is about 8 years older than me, they would like tell me stories about just, you had to establish a bar as a home base because you could not go find people otherwise. It was like a necessity
That's
and
true.
that's just kind of how it became a hangout spot. And I think my cohort can't really imagine that because we don't live near each other at all but we're very reachable, otherwise. And maybe that's
Of
why
course.
we can live, not close. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I would just say I don't have a ton of nostalgia for that because I just felt like I didn't really know what was going on.
Sure.
But when I hear people talk about maybe like a few years ahead of me, then I sort of wonder like, oh, that just seems very genuine and like a real sort of like relationships grounded in the real.
Yeah, for sure. I
Mhm.
mean, do you get young people who read the newsletter or any of your other work elsewhere coming to you and saying, "Hey, Delia, please guide me on how to navigate the current moment because you've been through it and you're, wiser?"
I think every now and then, I think a lot of people, are always wanting to know like how do I become tapped in? Like how do I sort of dive into, New York media and figure out like who's who and what's going on. And I'm always sort of like, I don't know. I'm always sort of like, I don't know, I've been here 10 years and it
Sure.
probably takes around that amount of time. But I do lament because I talked to them about like, when Twitter was the Twitter that, I came of age with in 2015 and change, it was a very useful social graph to figure out who was smart, who lived in New York, who maybe you could bump into at this coffee shop, who seemed friends with whom. You could assemble that social graph in your head a little bit.
Yeah,
But I mean, I think Instagram is kind of like that now. But I was sort of, I think sometimes I feel badly because I'm sort of like, you could be 22 and like new to the media industry, but you could kind of sit behind a computer and figure out like yeah, just like who's hanging out and who's doing stuff and who seemed friendly and who's hiring even like things like that.
sure.
Um, and I don't think that really exists. I think you have to really kind of go in deep a bit and to figure out what's going on.
Is there any place, I mean, that being said, is there any place, and I am reminded, I think we maybe bumped into each other very briefly outside Time Again for a byline event or something like, maybe I saw you across the event or something like that. Are there
Mhm.
places, is there any place like that that you sort of, you know, where everybody knows your name type thing?
Like for me personally, or just in New York
Yeah, well, or
it's
let's. I
possible.
mean, it could be for you personally, or it could be like and feel free. Don't give away secrets if you want to gatekeep them. More what I mean is like the place where it happens more often than other places, I guess, is sort of a way to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Byline and The Drift do a really good job of throwing these consistent parties because I think, you can go to the hate read party and maybe you'll see these people again next year if maybe it happens again next year. But they're
Right.
doing these like the Drift has, I think, usually has like a celebration every quarterly issue. I think Byline is I are they monthly? I actually don't know. But they put
It,
out a lot of issues and they're doing a lot of events. And I think that's actually really I can't imagine how hard that is, but I think that's really nice because it gives people sort of this regularity where you can be like, I maybe I'll see them again at this thing, or like if I miss this one, I know I can be at the next one. And
right.
yeah, I don't know. I think people give there's like I think a lot of shade thrown in a way where it's just like, are we do we have indie publications or do we just are people just doing parties and then making publications to support it? And it's like, I think it's great, even if it is the latter, because we don't really have like a normal, like a regular social nexus otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. Well, not to mention that we also don't have a regular monetization model for particularly
Hmm.
independent publications. Like if you're not thinking about how to bring commercial viability in through every channel, be it through subscription, be it through event, be it through advertising, be it through um, classifieds, which you did I haven't seen any classifieds in a while. Have you been backed off the classifieds?
It's kind of just dried up. I'm gonna be so
Okay.
honest. Yeah, I don't know if I don't know what's up with that. It used to be really, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, first and foremost, if you're listening, these links, classifieds, go get them. But secondly, I just thought that the openness to it, and you're basically saying like, hey, here's a means by which I can bring some value to this thing that I presumably will not hate doing, and which will, you know, use this platform for the benefit of the community. I thought was really smart and good, and it's another Deez Links experiment, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, because you seem to have a good like instinct for those things. So
Yeah, I know the classifieds that really started, I think, during the pandemic when there were all those layoffs. And so it's kind of like, I wonder if, like, if people just send in like a little listing about themselves and maybe I'll try to organize it by like industry. I wonder, like, if people will read these. And that was sort of like, yeah, it wasn't like, oh, I didn't set out with like, I'm going to set up this experiment and see if people actually read this newsletter. But it
right,
kind of was helpful to be like, oh, people were reading these, people got some jobs out of this. Like, that's actually really good to know. I think even just this like belief that people like, it was helpful to find out that like, not only do people read this newsletter, but also there is like other people believe that people read this newsletter, if that makes
sure,
sense,
yeah,
So it's a very like
absolutely.
nice vote of confidence.
To that end, are you a metrics person? I am not, and much to my detriment.
No.
I should spend a lot more time in the metrics of SIC and just the other things that I do. Do you is that by is that by choice? Is that by nature? Do you not have time?
I think it's a little bit of all of that because I worked at BuzzFeed for 4 years, and we
Oh, I
sort
didn't
of
know
lived
that.
and died by metrics.
Yeah, of course.
And I just remember thinking like, yeah, this quiz did really well, but like, who's to say if it was because of the idea or just the exact tone of voice? Like, I was sort of like to quantify even something that seems as simple as like a quiz is actually, I think, kind of you could kind of bullshit, whatever reason you think people clicked on it and then try to, you know, riff on that. And that was actually really my job at BuzzFeed was like, my last job was just sort of like, these quizzes did really well. I'm going to come up with some insights into maybe, how we can replicate the success. But I think really at the end of the day, sort of secretly felt like I think the secret is just like keep making things you care about because that's sort of a natural translation into your
Yes.
excitement to other people's excitement. So I don't know. Yeah. So I don't think that like I feel like these links doesn't really lend itself into sort of being like, oh, people really like links about surrogates or cozy lit. Like I don't really totally know what to do with that, and I don't know
Yeah.
that I should.
You just breadcrumbed away into another story. I'm sure you were like architecting that, which was the big story in the New York Times over the weekend about the state of surrogacy and fertility. Um, we talked at Casey's dinner that the guys at Day One did a few 6 weeks ago, whenever that was, about a post that you had just written that morning, I think, or just published that morning, which wasn't about fertility or surrogacy or whatever, but it was about just like the sort of state of the modern relationship and romance and stuff. Like, so when you sent this note back about the New York Times piece, I was like, oh, I feel a connection there. Is that just something that's sort of on your mind generally, or was it like before you answer, Avery Trufelman last week was talking about how she had tons of friends who were dealing with fertility issues, and there was nothing in the health system to address it. And so I thought that
Mhm.
the story following her comment was really fascinating. And then you keyed in on it as well. So just like clearly something
Yeah.
there.
I feel like I think, my interest in like Sarah Topol's story was, I'm not, I think personally, like looking into surrogacy. Like that's not, I think, like the subject itself is not like this like personal, super personal like, media interest of mine. Maybe it will be one day. But I think I am really fascinated by this idea of like, if we have come, in modern life, if we're sort of like, if we've come to expect a like an almost absolute degree of control over every part of our day, whether it's like what you eat, where you live, who you're friends with, who's in your life, like, what your career is. I think I'm just very fascinated with this idea of how our modern expectations of control are extending to kind of like famously historically like hard parts of life that kind of resist control, whether it's choosing when to, have a family or choosing what to do about your body, um, or even choosing like, like a partner. I think when we were at that dinner, I was sort of talking about like, I think this idea of like, I must optimize my life for this optimal partner, and then we will have an optimal home. And then like every step of the way, I think we have this expectation, whether subconsciously or not, of like there is one good way to do this, and I better figure it out, or
Right.
it will all fall apart. And so I kind of see, I think, that surrogate story was very dark and like horrific because you kind of see how, something as like wonderful and maybe and even anodyne as like a family living in one country really wanting to have a child, and like how that has like wrought this like incredible like I would even call it a black market because it seems like it's
Oh,
very out in the open, right, in Georgia, and the effects it has on the people who are kind of exploited in that. And so yeah, I think Sarah made like a really good point where it's like there's just like an incredible need in both sides of this sort of situation of like people who want to be surrogates, people who are searching for surrogates. They're both incredibly vulnerable. There's a very I don't know, in demand like product or supply, and like what is going to happen with this. But I think at the root of it is this idea of like, I don't know.
uh, optimizing everything, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. I think maybe when we had dinner, we might have talked a little bit about the one bit of advice that I give to young people younger than I, or actually not even people younger than I, just people, um, most of whom happen to be young because I'm very old. But is like life stage changes are hard. There is never a good time for them, right? There is never a good time to get married. There's never a good time to have kids. There's never a good time to move house, to change jobs, whatever. Like, all of these decisions are gonna be difficult and painful to some degree or another. They are all also going to be things that you learn from and benefit from in some like really major and existential way. So just fucking do it rather
Mhm.
than trying to optimize everything. And but that's also, that sounds hard, right? It sounds like, well, if I can find a solution remotely, if I can have, a baby DoorDash to me, why would I not? And
Mhm.
it's you're right. It is emblematic of the modern condition. The absurdity of the modern condition is. a wiser man than I used to say. All right. Well, I understand that. What I'm interested in this, in having brought together the vector of this, that big New York Times newsy piece, the pop culture nostalgia / cultural analysis of Ryan Broderick, the uh you know art critique almost of Zohran Mamdani's performance. Your triangulation of sources is really fascinating to me. What else do you pay attention to that brings you news source, brings you closer to, I don't know what, stories that interest you?
Um, it's kind of a boring answer. Like, one is just like group chats for sure, but like I also still look at Twitter all the time, and
Okay.
seeing the different ways it's really kind of like mutated is really interesting because like I was looking at it the other day and I was like, I see how people tip over into any kind of conspiracy theory, any kind of psychosis, because every tweet, and like my timeline has figured this out, is like every tweet is like, there could be this danger you don't know about. And like, why don't you read more about this danger? Whether it's like a toxin or some like medical study or, the flu season or, the coming recession, the coming climate change. Like there's just a million things to worry about. And I was reading, I was just like, yeah, I see how people just kind of like snap and tip over and try to connect all these things because this is insane. But I do kind of, there's like still like one little like like last remaining like somewhat objective brain cell left that's sort of like, it's really interesting to figure out, to sort of see like what fears people are learning to prey on, whether, because it changes. Like that's,
Yeah, oh,
I
for
think, what's
sure.
interesting to me is that these fears change, and whether you need to be on guard for like 3 red flags that you're in a toxic situationship, or you know this protein powder might kill you. You're sort of like, oh my god, every day is fresh hell. And there is some, I guess there's sort of some kind of like, there's this a sort of creativity to that, almost in a way of like living a life that's like that versus what I imagine, like, when I romanticize like medieval surf life, where it's like they were mostly worried about like probably one of three things, like starving, war, and I don't
Cold.
know, cold, just cold. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I imagine that like it's just a very different mindset. Whereas every day you're sort of like, I think in the modern life, it's like, so, the ways that
So
attention can be captured are infinite.
well, I mean, it's funny because I have a remote vacuum made by the Roomba Corporation, and now I'm concerned that, like my vibrator, it might be spying on me because of its new Chinese ownership. Sorry, that
Could
was a
be.
couple
Yeah,
of
that,
couple.
but it's like that'll take a whole day of just worrying about that, and you're like, I didn't even know this could be something I think about.
All right, so God. All right, that's actually an interesting thing. I talk about frequently how I am very much a glass half full, intrinsically optimistic person. Are you an intrinsically optimistic, pessimistic, neutral person? Would you choose to define yourself in or identify yourself in any of those ways?
Mm, I don't know. I think I really cycle between the two, and maybe that's like
Mm,
kind of exhausting in itself. Because like I was thinking about this the other day, and just in terms of media industry stuff, because I think a lot of places are, either rechamping like, what are your predictions, or just even
yeah, of
informally
course.
in
Time of
conversations
year.
like,
Yeah.
where do we think this is going to go? And I think when I start talking about it, I feel very pessimistic, where I'm just like, I think a few people will do really well. But then I kind of get this like lizard brain sort of like selfish optimism, where I'm like, but, who's to say that you or I can't be one of those people?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
So I don't even know if that's optimism. I think that's just like a real like toxic hustler mentality of like, but it could be me, which I think is actually very internet, very America of like, yeah, things are probably not headed in a good direction, but some people are about to do really well. And maybe that's how they trick us.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, what you're describing in that hustler maxing thing has been rebranded recently as high agency, and this notion that, it's like you do have some level of control to put yourself into those situations, and so you should take advantage of that and
Mhm.
become high agency. Um, yeah, I think I feel like you're pretty emblematic of most people cycling between the 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 two sides, and it makes sense as a just a pragmatic way to live your life. Like, to be blind or dumb to all of these potential liabilities is obviously not good, but to put too many eggs in the basket of I'm the one and only special person is a little naive as well.
Yeah, you really have to believe, like, this is getting kind of philosophical now, but I think right now it's like you really have to believe very firmly in some way that, like, I'll be okay. And I think
Yeah,
that's like how you just move through the world in a sane way. But then I think, where does that transition into, like, I'm going to dominate, I'm gonna hustle max this whole situation and I will be not only okay, but I'm gonna like come out of this on top, is where
I'm gonna win. I'm gonna win.
everyone
I'm
else
gonna
gets
win.
hurt. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I
Yeah.
think it circles back a little bit to a moment that I hope that we are entering, and the Mamdani election, and the sort of the feeling that you described earlier, I think is hopefully a little bit of an indicator of it. But it's just this notion of like, we have spent 20 years building towards this incredible, like, binary sense of the world, right? You are right or left, you are red or blue, you are
Mhm,
winning or losing, you are right or wrong, whatever the case is. And the truth
mhm,
is that none of those things has ever been as true as it is easy to present them as. And I hope we're coming back to a notion of like, eh, we all recognize that there's a problem. Let's try to, like, dispense of this behavior that hasn't worked for 20 years, and start to come together again and collaborate on finding a solution. I hope so anyway.
mhm. I hope so too. I think, yeah, to sort of again, like I think I like this full circle moment a lot because I do think that is what strikes me as very hopeful about
Yeah.
Zoran's whole like deal and his win is this idea of like I think a lot like a lot of friends, people I know who I would say I think they're doing really well. They don't really need a socialist mayor in Gracie mentioned, but I think that, even the ability to recognize of like, yes, I had a really good year, but like things are not good for other
Yeah.
people. And I stand to benefit should things improve for other people.
Well,
And,
and I think that, sorry to cut you off, but that's exactly it, right? It's like the rising tide really does raise all boats
mm,
if you commit to getting in a boat and being a part of it. But if you're just trying to fucking drive off the horizon, it anyway, I
mm,
lost. That was a terrible, terrible analogy, and so I lost it. So I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring
that's
such
okay.
clumsiness.
But I think you're sort of,
Thank you, Delia.
yeah, I think that we're sort of figuring out like there are these choices that people are making where it's sort of either that, I'm going to either I try and be a part of this and, throw my lot in with, maybe like this idea of like this gen pop and I throw my lot in with them and rely, sort of gamble on this sort of like mutualism of like other people. Or if I don't trust other people, if, this has not worked for me, then like I'm getting what's mine and I'm getting the fuck out of here and going to my New Zealand bunker. And I think those are two very like valid responses in some ways,
Yeah.
and
No,
we're seeing how that works out.
yeah, I think you're right that they are valid. I also am very much in the mutualist camp and hope that that is the one that you know, persists and succeeds, or that we all return to. But in any case, Julia, this has been fascinating. Thank you for taking the time with me, and I'm glad we got to sort it out before the holidays. Are you going anywhere special for the
I think I
the little
might be
break?
going to London for Christmas.
Oh,
It's sort of a
cool.
very last minute thing, but yeah, if anyone has any recs, let me know because I've never really. I'm usually like planning things like months in advance, and this kind of just came up. So
I'll
maybe it'll
hit
be
you.
fun.
I'll hit you offline with a couple of suggestions. My wife is English, and so I
Oh,
have
amazing.
spent plenty of time there. Cool. Well, and so before we go, where else? So we know that Deez Links, right? But is there any place else that people should look for your work or your POV?
Um, I feel like I'm just like living and breathing on Instagram, honestly. Otherwise,
Okay.
is that a strange thing to drive people to? Follow me on Instagram.
No, but you have to tell
I
us
don't
where
know.
to follow you. Is it Deez Links or is it something else?
It's Delia with 3 E's. So it's like DEEELIACAI. Um, and yeah, I feel like that feels like the most direct conduit, between the
Okay.
internet self and the self now. So that's where I'll be probably all the
Okay.
time. Yeah. You seem perturbed by that. Are you worried that I said that?
No. I'm not. No. Not in the least. Not in the least. It was not what I was expecting you to say. So that's
Oh,
another curveball with that, which I love. It's cool.
yeah. 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 I gotta say that's the direct conduit. Newsletter only comes out twice a week anyway. So
I gotcha. Cool. Well, listen, everybody, this has been Delia Cai. This has been Sick Talks number 114. You should look for her on these links and on Delia Cai on Instagram. I'm Ben Dietz. You can find me at sick.substack.com. And thanks very much for tuning in. Appreciate it.
and Dietz nuts,
Oh, yeah,
right?
that's right. It's all Dietz nuts at on all platforms.
Yeah.
All right, Delia. Thank you again. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Bye.